And it's my pleasure to introduce and to bring up to the stage the head coach with two first names, George Karl. That was one of the original ad campaigns right after the Sonics hired. Well, they hired George, and then you had to win a little bit, and then they did some ad campaigns, and one of them was the head coach with two first names. And I'll say that the day that the city council kind of folded on the last chance to keep the Sonics here, Dave Grosby and I did our show at FX McCrory's, and appropriately it was empty. There's nobody in the bar at 3 in the afternoon except Dave and I, and we were both just distraught. And I looked up, and Slick Watts came walking in, and you know, it's kind of a sad story in some ways, but he was right there, and he said, Mike, he says, it's like a death in the family, and it was. To try and explain it to people who aren't basketball fans, what that was like, it's hard to do. I remember talking to you late in that period, too, and you said, Gas, you can't let this happen, like you were going to hold me personally responsible. I'm like, yeah, I know.
I was in Olympia with my daughter, and
Yeah.
I was driving a car, and I had to pull over.
Yeah.
I had to pull over and pull in the parking lot and just go, what the hell is going on? And
Yeah.
I don't know. David Stern didn't like us. That's kind of my conclusion. Oh, I'm not allowed to say that right now.
There's a lot to it, but I think the thing that shocks me the most is we're 13 years later, or 14 years now, and still waiting their return. I think they're coming back, but it sure has taken longer than everybody thought it would have. Let me circle back around. Hall of Fame, we were talking about that, and what it mean? You've had a month now to think about it. What's it mean to think that your name now is etched in with the other legends of the game?
Do you want the ego answer, or the humble answer, or the...
Give me both. What's the ego answer?
I did it my way.
Yeah, you sure did.
And a couple of my players, a couple of my assistant coaches said you should be introduced with the song I Did It My Way.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could coach in the NBA today. It's a different world. You know, it's something I've been out now 7 or 8 years, and the league has changed tremendously in that short period of time. But I was lucky. I mean, my last chance would have been in Seattle, and then to get a team here in Seattle that just fit me. I love long, athletic, defensive-minded guys, and I like to play fast, and we were fast. And Bob Whitser was a general manager that could look me in my eyes and tell me to shut up or pick it up. You know, he had a way of communicating with my attitude and maybe my ego at that time. And from the standpoint of the Hall of Fame, it's kind of like, I don't know the word, and maybe I should go get somebody to define it. It's kind of released all my demons. I've kind of joined a club that I don't have with a ring on my finger or winning a championship, but I do have the Hall of Fame club on my side. And, you know, we lose a lot of games in the NBA. I won about 60% of my games. That means we lost 40% of them. And there are a lot of tough nights, and not winning a championship means you got your butt beat in the playoffs a lot of times. The ceremony is great. The only way I can say it best is, you know, when I go to a World Series game or the Indianapolis 500 or go and see the Mona Lisa, these great things that people go spend a lot of money to go see, I've always felt they come up a little short. The Hall of Fame did not come up short. Not for me, it didn't, and not for my family. What I loved about it is I had my whole family there, and everybody had a smile on their face. Everybody was kind of in an energized space that we were probably thankful it finally got there. But more than anything, it was just kind of a celebration that my family is a basketball family. My son's a basketball coach. My son-in-law is a basketball coach. Both my daughters are very good athletes. My daughter plays soccer in college. My other daughter could have played basketball in college, but decided to be a student. And now we can live in a club of a fraternity that makes me very happy. And I wouldn't have gotten there without Seattle. I mean, you guys don't understand. When you average almost 60 games a year winning, there's not many at times in history of basketball that's happened. I know we don't have a trophy in Seattle, but we had 7 great years of basketball. A lot of fun along the way, a lot of good wins, and some bad losses. So, and I love coming back up to Seattle, being a part of the community. I don't know, iconic Sonics, I don't know why it's kind of grew into being a very special part of what I like to do. It gets me back in Seattle, it gets me back here. But more than anything, we got to get the Sonics back in time. And I think that's why we're all really here. Deep down inside, we want to do whatever it takes, whatever is necessary to do the right stuff, to keep the momentum that we have going in the right direction. I don't know if it's a year from now. Chris is going to tell us all that in a couple minutes. I don't know if it's a year from now or 2 years from now, and it might even be longer. But it makes no sense in the basketball world why Seattle doesn't have a basketball team. 0 sense. Other than sports has become very capitalistic. It's gone from $1 million business to $1 billion business. And that's the world we're dealing with right now. And thank God Seattle has a lot of billionaires, so we'll be okay.
You mentioned coming back up here, and you have done that. Gary and Sean have been very involved in the community. Detlef still lives here and is very involved in the community. And there's others too. Keeping the colors alive, keeping the markings alive, keeping the story. That was an incredible thing that you guys have done, because for years there was no chance because there wasn't a building that would work and it isn't going to happen. Now all of a sudden there's a building that would work. Now all of a sudden there's people in line to own. And along the way, the Sonics name has stayed alive because of the things you guys have done. And I think that's really important, because that doesn't always happen. That does not always happen when the team leaves. And you guys have done a great job of that.
I don't think we should get that credit. We're piggybacking off a lot of guys that worked before we got here, before we got involved. From Sonic Gate to, just simply Seattle was and we just talked about how amazing they have kept the brand in front of the people, and the people got to get a lot of attention. After my Hall of Fame speech, the one thing I didn't thank was the fans. And Seattle has a hell of a fan base for basketball. And I'm pretty certain the NBA knows that.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm sure the NBA knows that. And I know the Kraken sold out in, 28 hours or 48 hours they sold out. I think the Sonics will beat that. If and when we get it, I think they'll beat that. And, and everybody I talk to with the team, like Sam Perkins and Nate and Det and Gary and Sean, everybody wants to come back and help.
Right.
And I'm on that page. I'm not sure I'll sweep the floor, but maybe I would come back and Seattle.
If on opening night we got George out there cleaning up after the guys crash onto the floor. During your speech, you thanked a lot of people. I always thought I knew you pretty well. I know you well. You always wore your emotions on your sleeve. You didn't hide a lot. I was not aware of the influence and the friendship and the love you had for Bobby Jones until you got into that speech. I was like, oh, and of course, you played together. I don't remember you talking about him. Maybe I just wasn't there that day. But talk a little bit about your relationship with him, because I think you said something like that nobody ever competed harder. I think that maybe is what you said about him, that he just was such a legendary Tar Heel player, a legendary NBA player, and as it turns out, a real important part of your life.
Bobby is a guy that, I probably see once every 3 or 4 years. Came to Spain. He's been, every once in a while running each other in Charlotte. He lives in Charlotte. He actually coached high school basketball, won a state championship in basketball. But what I love about Bobby is our connection when we were at Carolina was real. It was tight. We played ball, but we also grew up together. We grew up a little bit from a standpoint of becoming men. Dean Smith is I've said 100,000 times that Dean Smith is a hell of a basketball coach, but he's a better coach of men than he is of basketball. And Bobby and I, why don't we put a table right here? Bobby and I have just, we connected from a standpoint of being great competitors. Bobby Jones did not work hard on his game, but he was really, over my whole time in basketball, all the guys I've ever coached, all the guys I've ever played with, no one was a winner as much as Bobby Jones was. And everybody in the NBA wants talent, but I want winners. And Bobby Jones was the most, he won. Guy knew how to win, he knew how to influence winning. Didn't care about numbers. Today's game, we care about numbers way too much. But Bobby is just that. And I was with him in Charlotte. I was in Charlotte a couple of days ago with Mitch Kupchak. And Bobby's the same guy. Mm-hmm. He's the same guy today that he was 40 years ago. So it's a wonderful story.
Is it true you guys, I never heard this, I was reading some stuff, that they called you guys ham and eggs in the backcourt?
Bobby wasn't a backcourt player. Bobby's 6'9", played up front.
Yeah.
I mean, today's game has a lot more guys that have the lob in the game.
Right.
But people feel, when I played, there wasn't a dunk. You couldn't dunk. But if we could have dunked, Bobby Jones would be on the highlight film. Because we had a lot of lobs to the rim, but he couldn't dunk it then. They took it out of the game for, I won't go into that one, but they were afraid I might dunk someday. But
you could dunk in your before your legs gave out on you, couldn't you?
Yeah,
you're big enough. You could probably dunk.
I could dunk a volleyball. I don't know about basketball.
Who was Ham and Eggs? I remember seeing that somewhere. Was that a high school nickname? Because the only reason I bring it up is the other guy was Eggs. I mean, who would they call Ham?
Ham and Eggs would be probably in my high school.
Yeah.
I had a high school teammate who was a point guard that threw the ball to me almost every time down the court. So
there you go. You mentioned Coach Smith, and you mentioned him in your speech. I had the chance to meet him a couple of times. You obviously knew him very well. You say he's a great coach of men. I don't know if there's a story that comes to mind or just what made him so good. You know, the wins eventually are a big part of it, but it's more than that. Why was Dean Smith, why is he, many years after the fact, considered by many still to be the best coach ever? Some might say Coach K, some might say others, but Dean would be right in the argument as the best coach ever in college.
Well, my belief is he's the best college coach because he believed in the student athlete. I don't know if he'd be in today's game. He got out of the game because he didn't like what was going on around the game. Coach Guthrie's got out of the game because he didn't like what's going on around the game. Roy Williams got out of the game because he didn't want to do this NIL stuff. He just didn't understand it, and he didn't want to try to understand it. So, but only thing I can tell you about Coach Smith would lose an NCAA championship game if it meant helping a kid to get back on the right path. That's how much he cares about doing it the right way. I mean, I say a lot of coaches, I said, Coach Smith never swore. And the only time you get mad, what do you say? Damn it, you know how to do it the right way. Do it the right way. In today's game, if you can watch basketball and, sport has become a little more entertainment oriented. And I'm not sure that's the way Coach Smith wanted the game played. Coach Smith believed the game of basketball was a we game and not a me game. And today we have a world of a lot of me guys out there. And that just doesn't work, I think, if you want to win championships. If you want to win championships, you got to be a we game.
Let's talk a little bit about Pittsburgh and growing up there. You were born in 1951. That would have made you class of 69, I think, high school-wise. I'm wondering, basketball-wise, as much as you loved the game, and by now you would certainly have loved it by the time you were a senior in high school, what was it like in 67 when the ABA came to town, the Pittsburgh Pipers with a superstar named Connie Hawkins, who wasn't allowed in the NBA because he was part of a college point-shaving thing, and the NBA was going to ban him, and Roger Brown, a few other guys, and they all found a job in the ABA, and the ABA was exciting and fun, and the Pipers win the first title. Did you go to any of their games? You and your buddies ever go in?
No one went to the game, so the tickets were really cheap.
So you went.
So I went. I went to a lot of games. I didn't see Game 7. That game was actually a Game 7 against Doug Moe, who I didn't know at the time. But Doug Moe was also one of the guys who was banned from the NBA. And Doug's now one of my good friends. And Connie Hawkins got 51 on him in Game 7. So anytime Doug would give me him, Doug coached me for a while. Anytime he'd give me some crap or some shit, I always said, Doug, remember the 51 Connie got on you? But yeah, I started out a long time ago. I had a junior high coach that took me to any game I wanted to go to. And we went to a lot of Condor games, went to a lot of Duquesne basketball, University of Pittsburgh basketball, and also went to a lot of high school basketball. And but I don't even know, you know, Gas. I grew up being a baseball player.
Right.
I grew up because my favorite athlete was Roberto Clemente. And I would go down to I'd go to Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, not every Saturday, but a lot of Saturdays for $1, sit in the bleachers, usually in right field with Roberto Clemente. I mean, even today, the reason people ask me why do I bow my head at the national anthem, it's because Roberto Clemente bowed his head at the national anthem. So.
Wow. I was going to go to that. Would you have played, because you played baseball, you obviously were better at basketball, and basketball was a great career for you. Would you have played baseball if the opportunity had been there, or were you good enough to keep playing it, or did basketball just win out because of the talent?
I'm not sure I could have hit the curveball.
Yeah.
You know,
Welcome to the club.
you know, I mean, a lot of people thought I would learn, but my dad was pretty dominant in my upbringing. Was I was going to go to college, and at that time there was not a lot of baseball scholarships, not in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There might have been some in California and Arizona,
right.
But in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you know, there's many more opportunities to play basketball and get your college education paid for. I had an older sister who took all the family savings. And my dad said to me, he said, I don't know if I can afford to send you to college. And he asked me to go to work when I was 16. When I turned 16, he wanted me to get a part-time job. And I said, Dad, you're off the hook for a scholarship. I said, I'll get a scholarship, and if I don't, it's on me. And he trusted me, he believed in me. And I remember the day I signed with North Carolina, he had like 20 questions for Coach Smith on how much money he would need to help pay for my education. Coach Smith said, everything's paid for. My dad kept saying, it can't be everything. Tell me what I need to. And then my dad retired, and I got $125 a month from the federal government for Social Security. So I was a rich man on campus.
Didn't your dad say to you, and I've always, when I heard this story, and this is a story I heard many years ago, I think you told me, and I think it really kind of forged who you became in your life. Didn't he say to you, he wants you to get a job, and you said, I'm going to get an athletic scholarship, and he said, okay, the first time your coach comes to me and says, you're not working hard on your game, you're going to have to go get a job. Did your dad say something like that, right?
I think he might say he might kick my ass. But,
yeah, he instilled that work. If you're going to be basketball, you better take it seriously.
Well, he basically didn't know much about athletics. My grandpa is the one that taught me baseball. He taught me basketball. He was the guy who was home and would take me to the fields or go out and throw the ball back to me. And my grandpa died when I was in 5th grade. And my dad tried to do everything for me that my grandpa did. And it was kind of hilarious because he couldn't catch a football very well, but he tried. He actually couldn't catch a fastball very well, but he tried. And my dad would come home and he had bruises on his legs and because he wasn't a very good athlete. And so what he told me when I asked him, I'll get a scholarship, he basically said, all I want you to do is work hard. And it probably was more emphasized than just work hard, you know. I kind of make it a mind that work hard. He wanted me to be the hardest worker on the team. And I kind of had that over my head a lot. And then when I went to North Carolina, we had a guy on our team named Steve Previs. He was from Pittsburgh. We're both from Pittsburgh. And Steve Previs was a harder worker than I was. But I didn't let anybody know that because I wasn't going to let him outwork me unless I was right next to him. And so 99% of the time I was right next to Steve. And the one legacy that we have in North Carolina is there's not many guys that played defense like Steve and I did at Carolina, and I'm proud of that.
The work that you put in, it's funny because last time we were all up here, we got laughing. You and Gary Payton were talking about all the fights you'd had, and Sean was there, and he said, the one time they had a fight, and you went into a room with like Nate McMillan and said, we got to get rid of Gary, and Nate said, the whole problem is you and Gary are exactly alike, and meanwhile, Gary's down the hall with Sean, said, we got to get George out of here, and Sean says, the whole problem is you and George are exactly alike. I always said about Gary, no one ever walked out of a game saying he wasn't working hard or trying tonight. And it's kind of another thing you guys share in similarity. No one watching you up here would ever have said, George was taking it easy this last week. He wasn't working hard. That never was the case with you. You put the time in, man. You clocked in and clocked out.
No, I mean, I love the game, and I love the chess match of being a coach in the NBA and being around the great talent that the NBA players have. But, the one thing about Gary Payton is his competitive spirit is in your locker room, it's in your gym, it's in every game. And it's angry. If it's not done the right way, it's an angry. And a lot of coaches don't like that anger. I kind of like anger. I mean, I remember telling my Sonic teams many times, I want you to play crazy. I don't want you to play cautious. I don't want you to play passive. I want you to play crazy. And let me coach you down. Because when a team's not playing hard, it's hard to coach them up. It's a lot easier to coach a team down and control their craziness rather than say, let's go, we got to get going, we got to go. Because, I've always told this to young kids a lot, and I tell it also to a lot of pros, today's pros. In fact, I told it to a young player in Charlotte a couple days ago. Play hard. In the NBA, playing hard is not an attitude, it's a talent. It's a talent to be able to play harder than what's going on there on any given night in an NBA game. And that's kind of where my motto is always, I might not be really, really good, but I can outwork you. And because of that, I grew into not having much fear of the competitors. I mean, I got my ass kicked a lot of nights in the NBA, but I also kicked a lot of guys, like a lot of really good players' butts too, because I would go after them and not have a fear of them. And, today's game, we got a little bit softer game than we've ever had. And I really wish I would see a little more of attitude like Gary Payton or like me or someone else that likes to go nose to nose. Let's compete. You kick my butt, I'll shake your hand. If I kick your butt, I'll shake your hand. And that's kind of where my foundation came from.
The way they call the games now, Gary had lasted about 2 minutes in the first quarter, and he'd be bounced out, I think. A Hall of Fame career. It's not done yet. The work you've done up here to help keep the name alive and to keep the team connected to the community is appreciated by all of us. It's a delight to see you again, and you look good. You look happy, and I like to see that on you.
Are we going to talk about ABA?
You want to talk about the ABA, Doc? We got time to do that?
I
think it's cool.
Another fun thing about it is, I won't tell the short. I'll tell the short story, not the long story. About 3 years ago, how long's George Floyd situation happened? 2? It just gave me a feeling about how I felt in the 70s when I was playing, and about the ABA. And then I have a bunch of ABA guys in Denver that we have a little fraternity about once a month. We get together and have pizza and eat and talk about it. And I hang out with those guys. And a short story is the ABA has a lot. We're all about my age. There's 130 of us left. And a lot of guys are dying. And so I kind of came up with this crazy idea to do a documentary on ABA merging with the NBA. And the reason I did it because the NBA doesn't love the ABA. The NBA ignores the ABA. And we have some old timers here, but the history of the NBA in the mid-'70s, the NBA wasn't in a very good place. It was financially in trouble. Attendance wasn't great. And for whatever reason, it was not in a good place. the ABA was dying. It didn't have, no one was coming to the games, but we were playing in San Antonio and Indianapolis and Salt Lake City and Pittsburgh, and we were playing the small markets because the NBA didn't want to go to small markets. But the talent in the ABA was first class. And so when they merged, when the NBA was floundering, and the ABA, in my mind, had as much talent as the NBA. And so when they merged, they got 36 starters, 12 All-Stars, 8 Hall of Famers, and another 3 or 4 Hall of Fame coaches in one draft. In one draft, when the ABA merged the NBA, that all went to the NBA. And the other thing it got the league integrated to where the NBA could not ever control the black athlete again. Because in 1 year, the black athlete doubled in 1 year. And I played for the San Antonio Spurs, and within 2 years, we were playing in the conference finals in San Antonio. So we decided to put a documentary together. I've never done a movie. I know nothing about movies. I'm learning stuff every week on what the hell is going on. But we have a hell of a partner. Amazon bought it. So it's going to be Amazon and Truth in Basketball and a couple other guys. You know, we're hoping to get Julius Irving involved with it as an executive producer. And we're doing it right now. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Come on, hopefully it'll be out next summer.
It's such a great story, and for those of you who don't know, I was more of a fan of the ABA. I grew up in Indianapolis, and I remember I told you I used to heckle George when he was a Spur. I was just a little loudmouth kid in the stands yelling at him. The basketball was so good, and it's like the Wild West. There's not a lot of video of it anymore. It's kind of exists as word of mouth, and the fact that you guys are doing that is fantastic. And I know there's been a breakthrough in the effort to get financial help for some of those guys that need it. That was a huge, huge plus. The game owes those guys the dignity of being able to get a little help.
What is happening, and I must tip my hat to the NBA, except they should have done this 25 years ago.
Right.
The NBA gave the ABA, I think, $25 million. It might be a little more, it might be a little less. $27 million to the ABA players. And there's 130 years left. I think they're going to give us $500 a year, $500 for every year we played per month for the rest of our lives. And I want you to know, a lot of guys need that. A lot more guys than you think are struggling. We've had all pro ABA players die homeless in the last 5 years. And it's kind of a sad story. And I'm not saying the NBA abandoned them, but the process of the merger, someone abandoned them. And it's probably all of us are to blame. And I'm glad that we're giving 10% of the documentary to, what's it called? Dropping Dimes, which is a nonprofit that's been kind of helping ABA players in their struggles throughout the years.
It's great work. You're still active. You're still in the game. You didn't stop going to the Hall of Fame. You're still making contributions.
Oh, I don't think you're ever going to get me out of the gym. You know, my son wants to be an NBA coach, and that would be probably the greatest thrill I could ever have, is see him coaching an NBA game as a head coach. I think he'll get to the assistant coach. I don't know if he'll get to the head coach.
He may. He may. He's got the coaching gene, no doubt about that.
He's good.
Our first guest for the Season 4 of Iconic Sonics, George Karl, live at the Edgewater Hotel. Season 4 of Iconic Sonics, and we've got a special guest on a couple of levels. He's not only a news journalist extraordinaire on TV, he's got a face for TV still. He looks young. He's also going to be a guest host on Iconic Sonics this year, which I have no idea what that means. Chris Daniels, great to see you again, and welcome, sir.
It's good to see you on
And
a
Brett-
nice Seattle day.
Brett Goldberg is with us as well, the grand poobah of Iconic Sonics.
Well, I don't know about that, but I have some questions.
Yeah, well,
got
I'm glad, 'cause I'm
questions.
fresh out of Chris Daniels' questions, except for this one, and it is great to see you, and we've talked in the past about how you've been on the front line. There are other reporters, but you've been out at the front line really from going back to when the team was sold to Clay Bennett, and a lot of people from that day was like, well, they're moving, man. There's no way to save it. And then eventually they do move. And I don't think any of us thought it'd be 14 years and we're still talking about him coming back. But that's where we're at. But it feels like, Chris, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And for once, it's not a train coming at us. It's good news. Do you everybody, we talk to the Lywickies and they're like, yeah, we're not going to get in front of the story, but yeah, it's good. There's optimism. Is there reason for optimism? Is there any reason not to be optimistic about the team coming back?
I think the tenor is different now than perhaps any other time in the last 14 years. I think, we have seen over the course of time, especially after the Kings deal went sideways, that the NBA had long said we're not looking to expand at any point in time. And it was really out of nowhere when Adam Silver in December, in a slow news month, decides to float the idea that they're dusting off their playbook for expansion. And it went from 0 to 100 right away, right? Then Jenny Durkin, the then mayor, says, I've had conversations with Adam Silver and I'm very optimistic. Since that point in time, it's gone back down towards 0, right? It went from 0 to 100 in a hurry and it's now back down. But I don't think that the Lywickies, anybody involved with Climate Pledge, they just don't want to get out in front of the NBA right now, because I think the NBA hasn't fully made up their mind. I do think that there is still, based on the people I've talked to in the city, the way the NBA responds to any sort of questions, I don't think there's a consensus yet. And I think that's the hurdle that we can talk about more, that the NBA needs to get over before they're willing to start officially talking about expansion.
Chris, we talked the other day a little bit about some of the sequence of events that will go into this, and one of the things you said is a big barrier is the collective bargaining agreement. Can you describe what the CBA is, the timeline of that, and how that factors into something like NBA expansion?
Yeah, so there's 3 different things on the calendar that I think people need to pay attention to. One is the collective bargaining agreement that is up right now, that's being negotiated with the league and the Players Association. It is up in 23-24. They're negotiating that early right now to avoid any sort of lockout or strike. The following year, the media rights deal is up, and that could be potentially a massive windfall for the NBA owners. So there's a question of how the CBA is tied to the media rights deal. Do the players who don't have any sort of hand in the cookie jar for expansion fees right now, do they get in the CBA? Do they get a piece of that as well? That is what the NBA is trying to work out right now to see, and I think Adam Silver floated that trial balloon back in the end of 2020 to see just if there were owners that were willing to commit publicly to going down the expansion road. But I think the owners like Mark Cuban, they want to wait to see what those numbers look like. The other part of the calendar is 2026, and what Tim Lywicki has already announced down in Vegas with the idea of a new arena there in time for that season. So I think you look at those pieces that are part of this puzzle in the calendar, and that's what you're looking at to see how the CBA settles out. If it settles out here in the next 6 months, then what does that mean for the TV deal and digital rights deal? And then Vegas is getting their arena deal put together, and potentially 2026 is the date on the calendar when there could potentially be a team playing. The process would be earlier than that.
It seems as if, though, that the people involved from up here, again, just anecdotally, there's a cute video last week of the 3 kids looking for the new mascot for the Kraken, and they bring in a consultant named Detlef Schrempf. And Detlef comes into the video. It's really funny, and he proposes that they use Squatch, and the kids say, we can't use Squatch. He's going to be the Sonics when they come back. And Det goes, yeah, that's right. I don't think everybody'd be playing footsie this much about the Sonics coming back if they didn't feel like, look, yeah, to your point, there's still some business dominoes that have to fall, but they're going to. I don't know what I'd put a percentage on, but I believe they are coming back. I think it's a for certain thing. Based on that, why would you do that if you're the Kraken and Todd Lywicki's the CEO and Tim's the CEO of the arena? Why would you even get Detlef involved in this video if you hadn't had a pretty strong conversation with Adam Silver?
Well, and that's where 2026 comes into play. And I almost think that the NBA could also use the NHL's playbook. I think that Sonics fans haven't paid much attention to how the NHL did this whole process, where originally it was supposed to be Vegas and Seattle. The whole reason they kicked off an expansion process was because they thought they had deals in Seattle and deals in Vegas, right? So then that whole situation went sideways because the bids didn't come in from Seattle that they thought. So then they had to go through this whole weird thing with Quebec City, and we're only going to award the one team. But there was this process laid out to essentially allow the cities to make their bids with the idea that it was going to be Seattle and Vegas. I think you'd see something very similar with that with the NBA when they decide to say, okay, the expansion window is now open. We will accept these expressions of interest. That was Gary Bettman's favorite thing to say. And then go down a road where they award the two franchises. And I think it's going to be, again, Seattle and Vegas, the way things stand right now, as long as all the ducks line up.
Seattle and Vegas, I was going to go there next. There have been other cities, other markets that have been tossed into the mix, generally alongside Seattle. We had Mark Spears on the show last year. He mentioned Mexico City and a strong desire for the international effect that would present. There's Kansas City. The Kentucky Colonels were damn good and left Louisville 45 years ago. There's been a strong desire with Dan Issel and others to bring them back. But it's Seattle and Vegas is what's going to happen if it's going to happen?
I think it's Seattle and Vegas. I think all the Ducks are lining up that way. But I do think it was going to be Seattle and Mexico City back in like 14, 15, when it looked like there might be another arena. I think that was the direction the NBA was going, and they are very intrigued by Mexico City. They continue to do games down there. They've expanded their brand in other parts of the world. I mean, I think it was going to be Seattle and Mexico City, but it's interesting what's happened in Vegas. I mean, within 10 years, a 10-year span, they could go from players aren't allowed to be in casinos and make any sort of appearances to you're going to have all 5 major professional sports, and I include the MLS, which is now saying they want to expand to Las Vegas. You could potentially have all 5 leagues there in a period of time that was a decade ago. You would never think that any league would go there because of gambling, but now the leagues are part of it.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. I'm watching the commercial the other night. I mean, I never thought you'd see this. Archie Manning, one of the great quarterbacks of all time. His sons, Peyton and Eli, 2 of the great quarterbacks of all time, with comedian J.B. Smoove doing a commercial for Caesars on gambling on football. You're like, the NBA used to say you can't even, or the NFL used to say you can't even say Las Vegas during the Super Bowl. You know, they used to tell the announcers, don't even bring it up. It's amazing how fast it's changed. Is the NBA wedded to the idea of bringing them both in at the same time? Because I'm impatient. Our arena's done. We got people alone this team. I know they got to give them a little bit of time to ramp it up, but is there a scenario where Seattle maybe gets the franchise because they're ready to go in 24 or even 25, and then Vegas it takes till 26?
Yeah, I've never been convinced that it has to be a 2-off, but it definitely is cleaner for 2 teams at the same time, especially when you're talking about the billions of dollars it's going to take to buy those expansion franchises. Right. And that's where the math starts to get fuzzy, right? I mean, when Adam Silver made those comments, I remember hearing from Mark Cuban, who was on a podcast with Bill Simmons and talked about the short-term loan essentially expansion is, that you're giving up that piece of pie so many years down the road. And that's where the math factors in. And that's why guys like Cuban right now are against it. Mm-hmm. They don't know what that number of media rights that have been reported as high as $75 billion, how big that piece is going to be, and what that means in terms of siphoning off more money to Seattle and potentially Vegas.
Couple more questions, and then I wouldn't mind, actually, if there's any questions from the audience, you guys throwing out a couple of things at Chris or Gas or otherwise. But let's just ask this. What is the dollar amount? And it's interesting, and I ask that in part based on the news even from the last couple of days coming out of the Suns, and that Suns minority owner selling, I think, a third of the team for a reported $3 billion. So if you had to guess, I mean, does that make it $9 billion, or what are we talking? Is it 2, 3, 4? What are you hearing?
I think it depends on that TV digital rights deal. That's because that's the piece that the NBA owners would be giving up to these other cities. They would get the immediate money, right? They'd get that $6 billion split between 30 different guys. But what money are they giving up long term? So I think everybody's been throwing out the number $2 billion for a while. But depending on what happens with the Sun sale, what the valuation is there, I mean, that could reset the bar. It was below that for the Timberwolves in I think a really kind of odd deal there in Minnesota with Alex Rodriguez being involved. But I think I think everybody will be paying attention to what happens with that Suns deal with Sarver, given that he is just a portion of that overall control of the team.
Chris, let's just say the NBA is like, all right, we're ready to go. Is there any potential issue that we're not thinking about in Seattle? It feels like we got a building. I think there'll be people that want to own it. It looks like there'll be no government, tax dollars involved. So, I mean, most of the things that could trip it up. But is there anything we're not thinking of that could?
I would think the minor thing would be just where you put a training and practice facility and team headquarters, and what that could mean in terms of just the city of Seattle's process for getting all of that approved. But again, it wouldn't be a public money component. It would be a private money issue. But I would think that would be the smallest thing, and just making sure you have the dates and blocking out the dates on CPA, which, as you know, the Lightwikis have said is not a problem.
Right.
Last question before we open this up. And you mentioned this to me the other day. I don't think I had an appreciation for this. But I'm convinced, I'm very biased, I'm convinced the return of the Sonics to Seattle will be the greatest sports redemption story that there has probably ever been. When you look back at some of the other ones, you were teaching me about what happened in Baltimore when they lost the Colts. They didn't have a team for, I think it was 12 or 13 years, and the band played every Sunday still at the stadium as if there was still an NFL football team there. Charlotte lost an NBA team for 3 years. Louisville has lost a professional basketball team for 45 years, still gone. Doesn't seem like it's coming back soon. Where does this story potentially fit in terms of the narrative of a team lost and the return of that team to its market?
Well, I think you and George should start planning the documentary for the 30 for 30 on the return of the Sonics. I mean, the Colts story is a 30 for 30 in terms of the marching band that continued to go to every game for years, and they still got together and they still had this bond over a team that didn't exist. And I think that exists. That same situation exists here in Seattle. There was one name that you didn't bring up earlier, which is Jamal Crawford, who I think has done a great job in keeping people interested in the NBA, keeping this as a city and an area and a region where there have been numerous NBA players that have been playing in Jamal's crossover pro-am every summer and then going on to the NBA, and you could have an entire team full of Seattle guys. I think in part because of what Jamal does and keeping people interested in basketball. And I would hope, and this is just me being objective, that Jamal has a role in that future franchise, because he has, during these down years over the last, from 2008 to 2022 and to 2023, he's been the guy that's kept people watching NBA basketball, NBA players in Seattle.
Chris Daniels, long of King 5 TV, now with Sinclair Broadcasting, and our guest on Iconic Sonics. And Iconic Sonics brought to you by Rise Above, by the iconic Edgewater Hotel, Swinomish Casino and Lodge, Dick's Drive-In Restaurants, Epic Seats, Simply Seattle, and the Queen Anne Beer Hall. I'm excited. I like I said, well, I'll end it where we started, and we'll take some questions. It's going to happen. I'll be stunned. I'm stunned it's taken this long, but I don't, with everything else that still has to happen, I think it's finally going to happen.
Well, and just think about, again, the tenor. I go back to the conversation from the commissioner's office. The former commissioner spoke ill will of Seattle for years and took as many shots as he could for years, even into the 2012-2013 Kings story. What you hear now from Adam Silver is, we know Seattle's a great NBA market. We love Seattle. There's a lot of great fans there. It's a completely different tone from the league commissioner's office than what we've seen over most of these last 14 years.